Okay, good morning. So we learned in the Gemoro about the Shabbos day Kiddush. And essentially we learned that the entire Shabbos day Kiddush is one line, the Bracha HaGofen. Our Siddur, of course, has a page and a half of text we read. And as we noted, it's really custom to praise the Shabbos as you're about to begin this meal with this kind of non-Kiddush Kiddush. Right? It's not really a Kiddush. It's just because you don't want to disrespect the day meal, considering that the day meal is more important than the night meal. And if you had the night meal with Kiddush and a day meal without Kiddush, then it's not nice to the day meal, which is supposed to be at a higher level, that doesn't begin with like sanctified cup of wine. Okay, so you begin with Hagafen. And we found some legs in a verse, because the verse didn't have to say the word Yom, day, which as you note, day means 24 hours. So what's the difference? But it didn't have to say it, and therefore it's an allusion to perhaps doing something during Shabbos day. Okay. So we wanted to know where are all the paragraphs before coming from? What is it all about? And we also, by the way, spoke a little bit about people who start from Al-Kain without saying anything before. Is that okay? Is that not okay? And we noted that the word Al-Kain means and therefore. Well, you didn't say anything. What do you mean and therefore? That is an issue. We will address that. And by detour of what we're going to be learning, at the end, we'll come to that as well. Some commentary on whether it's correct to begin from Al-Kain, whether that's okay. I suggested start from at least from Kisheshes, which is the beginning of that verse, actually. It's a long verse, which begins Kisheshes and goes all the way through Cain, Al-Kain, which says, because God created the world in 6 days, he rested on the seventh, therefore God rested on the seventh, and that would give it some context of the therefore. That's a very good suggestion, as was suggested here, and perhaps we'll circle back to that at the end of this discussion. Because our discussion today is specifically on where did the paragraphs that we say before come from, and what's it all about. Now, I told you that my great-great-great-grandfather, I'm not sure how many greats that is, it's this book right here, Shaar HaKolel, written by Rabbi David Levi. I'm not sure how many greats to say. It's my father's mother's father's mother's father. Oh, wow. 5 generations from me. That's who it is, Rabbi David Levi, the rabbi of Nikolai of Ukraine, and he's also the Rebbe's great-grandfather. I shouldn't say also. He's the Rebbe's great-grandfather, and also happens to be my 5th generation grandfather. So that's like our familial connection point is in this Rebbe from David Levi. Wrote quite a bit, a few svarim, a few important books, and one of them is Shaar HaKolel. This Shaar HaKolel is a commentary on the Alter Rebbe's Siddur. So let's remember that a Siddur essentially, the Alter Rebbe didn't invent his own Siddur. We spoke about this before. Writing a Siddur doesn't mean you write your own text. This text comes from our sages thousands of years before. But in generations that passed on, there's different customs that evolve and different nuances to the text. And every now and again, you'll have a scholar that sits down and says, okay, let's make this grammatically correct, linguistically correct, historically correct, halachically correct. Right? We're learning about Yavitz on Shabbos. He wrote a Siddur, very important, famous Siddur. And the Alter Rebbe also wrote one. And Siddurs come along with instructions. Right? So the Siddur would say, insert this paragraph, this paragraph, this paragraph. Stand here, say this. Sit down, say this. Right? So there's a halachic commentary as well as the formulation of the liturgy that should be said. So the Alter Rebbe made such a Siddur. And for whatever reason, the Siddur, I guess, got lost, or the original manuscripts got lost. I'm not really sure. But sometime later, Rabbi David Levi, who lives, as you can see on the top of the page, 1815 to 1890, which is not long after the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe passed away in 1812. So we're talking about within 50, 60, 70 years of the Alter Rebbe's passing. He made it his mission to collect as many versions as he can of the printed Siddur that will presumably copied from the manuscript, and to rectify it in what became the Siddur Torah, which is like the authoritative Siddur of the Alter Rebbe. And he wrote a commentary on the Alter Rebbe Siddur, so explaining the Alter Rebbe's choice of liturgy, choice of word, choice of instruction. So I said that I would look up his book to see his commentary on Al-Kain, and indeed he does have a nice little commentary. So we're going to look at that with Hashem's help. We're going to take some detours on the way before we get there to tell you a little bit about Rabbi David, hope you don't mind, and a special Montreal connection. And I'll share with you some things I did not know. I shouldn't say discovered, but I learned new things that I did not know, specifically Montreal connection and connection with my father's family and my father's side, which the connection with my father's family I knew, but there's certain details about the founding of the Montreal community that I did not know that I found in doing a little research here. So let's begin. So on top of the page there, you'll see the text there. There's three lines of text. Yeah. So the 3 lines of text come from a different work that Rabbi David Levut wrote. I think it's the Beis Aaron. And as an introduction to that book, the Rebbe, which is the great-grandson of the author, right? The great-grandson of Rabbi Avram David Levut, as well as the official publisher of Chabad, right? That was one of his first jobs when he came to America before he was Rebbe, was to run the Chabad publishing house, which is Kahas. That's one of his first original jobs. And a lot of the Hasidic manuscripts that have been published in the last 50, 60 years is the Rebbe's doing. Saying before he became Rebbe, that was his big doing. He was collecting manuscripts and publishing them and so on. So he wrote a little bio on his great-grandfather's introduction to one of his other works. And there he describes his great-grandfather as follows. Avram David ben Merinav Yehuda Leib Lavot. Avram David, son of Yehuda Leib Lavot. Baal Mechaber Sefer Kavnaki, author of the book Kavnaki. As well as emendations to the laws of how to write a get. That was one of his expertise of Rabbi Avram David Levut, is how to write a get properly. When you write a get, you have to write the name of the people correctly, as well as the name of the city and river in which you are writing the get properly. And that was one of his efforts as a linguist to properly write in Hebrew lettering, secular names, or Yiddish names, or name of a river. How do you write it down and using Hebrew letters? There's a whole book on that. So Noiled Bishnas Tovkuf Ein He is born in the year Tovkuf Ein He. Tovkuf Ein He would be 1815, as I read on the top there. Here's how the Rebbe describes him as a person. He excelled in his sharp intellect. His Kashanis are his talents, and now that are elevated, like his extreme talents. I don't know how you say that. He's very talented. His great talents, I should say, and so he excelled in his sharp intellect, his great talents, and his broad knowledge in the sea of the Talmud. Gambit Kosai, as well as in his piety, B'toyev Levi in his good hearted nature, Kanalai Maritzim Rabim, acquired for him many great admirers, Asher Rachshalai Ava Rabba Kol Yamav, who felt for him a great love for all of his life. He was a beloved and well-known scholar. The first picture you're looking at there is something very unique. The first picture there, you see where it says atop Haskamas? Mm-hmm. It's unique because this Avram David Levut was first a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, and when Tzemach Tzedek passed away, he followed the Tzemach Tzedek's successor in Lubavitch, which is the Tzemach Tzedek's younger son, Rabbi Shmuel, the Rebbe Marash, which is without getting into too much history there, but there were other brothers, older brothers, the Marash themselves became Chabad Rebbes in other towns outside of Lubavitch, and they had bigger crowds actually. Most of the Tzemach Tzedek's chassidim did not follow his son, the youngest son, the Rebbe Marash in Lubavitch. Most of them followed other of the Rebbes in Kapust and Yezhin, in Liadi and other places. But this Avram David Levut stayed loyal to the house of Lubavitch, in the seat of Lubavitch, which is the Tzemach Tzedek's youngest son, the Rebbe Marash. And this Rebbe Marash, Rabbi Shmuel, wrote a approbation, like a haskama, when you give your stamp of approval on someone else's book. He wrote one such haskama for another book called the Beis Aaron that Rabbi Avram David Levut wrote, which is very unique that a Rebbe should write a approbation to a book. As a rule, the Rebbeim refrain from doing so. Many times, people would send our Rebbe, their books, and the Rebbe would say, "I'm sorry, it's the custom of the Chabad Rebbes that we don't write approbations for books, but God bless you, much success or whatever." But official, I agreed to this book. The Rebbeim didn't do that. But here, Rabbi Shmuel, as you can see here, it says in the bottom, Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel, the Marash did write such one. And then you could see the author's signature, and then the stamp there of his official seal. It's a little paragraph there where he asks people not to break the halachic copyright laws in his book, and it's stamped with his stamp there. It says Avram David Lavut, Moed Tzedek, Kehila, Nikolayev, halachic instructor of the rabbi of the community of the Kalayev.
Could it be two names, David and David?
Avram, David, two names.
So could David be?
David, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Yeah, I read in English. It's better choice.
Like Hebrew.
In Hebrew, it's one, Daled, Vav, Daled. That's it. It's the only way to sell it. It's a question of the Kiddush. Do you say David with a kamatz or Patach David? It's a Sephardic pronunciation, Ashkenazi pronunciation. Same name. Daled, Vav, Daled in Lashon Kodesh. It's a proper Ashkenazi pronunciation would be David, not David. Or David. That proper old Ashkenazi would be David. Okay, so now the Montreal connection on page 2, next page there. I knew tangentially a little bit about the story, but I didn't know as much as I know now, which I'm sharing with you. It's very exciting for me. Okay, so if start from the bottom of the page, actually, of page 2, continuing in that biography that Rabba wrote, Rabba writes about Avram David Lavut's children and family. He writes, from his first marriage, he had a daughter, Bela Rivka, goes on to describe their children, okay? So if you look at the second line, he says that from his first marriage, he had a daughter, Bela Rivka, and then they had children, and their children were Meir Shlomo. Meir Shlomo is his grandfather, who my son is named after. And then at the end of the third line, there's a name Mindel. That's Avram David Lavut's granddaughter, Mindel. That would be my grandmother's grandmother. Is this Mindel? Okay. On the last word on the third line. Then it says, his second wife, I assume his first wife passed away, so he remarried. He married a Polish woman named Pesya Hochstein, the Num Reb Menashe, that a son named Menashe Lavut. Now he had children, Chaim Yitzchak, Avram David, Yisrael Leib, Soichrim Canada, who are business people in Canada. So Avram David Lavut's grandchildren from his second marriage, his son Menashe from his second marriage, and his children are in Canada. So who's this Menashe Lavut? They do a little digging, and here's a picture of him, top of the page. Third from the left with the white beard, that's Rabbi Menashe Lavut. And then the middle with the black beard, that's the famous Chazan Yossel Rosenblatt. Mm-hmm. And then the third from the left with the big long beard is the famous Herschel Cohen. It's third from the left. Third from the left with the white beard is Menashe Lavut. Third from the right with the long white beard, is Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Cohen, the first chief rabbi of Montreal. And this is some sort of you can see in the top of the description there, in 1918, some sort of Jewish committee of relief for the war effort, I suppose. I guess because this is 1918, so it's a little bit after World War I. There must have been immigrants, so there were some committees that got together to help the Jews, I assume. So he's clearly, this Menashe Lavut is an important figure here in Montreal. Do a little more digging, and it turns out, so that there's I don't have it on the page there, but I have it over here on my screen. There's a website called Canadian Jewish Heritage Network, and they have in their archives old Jewish newspapers, and in one newspaper called the Kender Adler, which is an old Yiddish newspaper here in Montreal. You know this?
Sure, my grandfather used to read it.
Your grandfather used to read it. There you go. So in there appears an obituary for this Menashe Lavut, and in it he's described as founded the local Chabad organization. On the official corporation of the Nusach HaRishul, this Menashe Lavut is cited there as one of the incorporating founders. And so another obituary also says similar things. So anyway, I emailed them asking them for a copy of the look. For a couple of bucks, they're going to email me clippings of the newspapers in which he appears. But it seems like this might be the first Lubavitcher rabbi. I'm not sure if his official position is rabbi or some sort of Chabad leader in Montreal. So and moreover, so in the previous Rabbi writes a letter to this Menashe Lavut in 1929. Not 29. The previous Rabbi writes a beautiful letter to him. Says the letter opens up like this: I was happy to hear from you. You're doing well, and thank you very much for your blessings, including the blessings of the Chabad community there in Montreal. This is 1929. And thank you for the blessings from the community of our people, Chabad Hasidim, who daven in two Nisachari shuls in Montreal. Previous was telling us, 1929 there's two Lubavitch shuls in Montreal. Did you do that? Two Chabad shuls in Montreal in 1929. I had no idea. And thank you very much for your blessings and so on. And then the previous goes on to tell Menashe a whole teaching about the importance of reaching out to your fellow Jew, encouraging to come with you to learn Torah. And even though externally they might look like they're not interested, but deep down they're a Jew, and therefore you fan their flames, you'll see they're going to respond. Now he's telling him, you got to be the shliach in Montreal. You got to. So as much as there's two Chabad shuls, I don't know that they look like the way Shul on Westbury did. I don't know if that means they had long white beards and black hats, but I imagine it means that they came from Lubavitch families or Chabad families back in Russia, and therefore they felt more comfortable in a Chabad Orthodox shul. So they went to Nischari, but they probably had clean-shaven beards, I assume. But this Menashe Lavut kept his beard, and I guess therefore, because his father was this great Rabbi Nikolaev, author of books and the Hasidim, I assume he played some sort of leadership role, as evidenced by this letter. And it concludes at the end, and therefore I'm turning to you. You're known as a understanding man who can think well. Please take these words to heart, how to help other people and to establish times for teaching Torah and serving Hashem and bringing people's hearts together and the spirit of Chassidus, and wake up the branches that they reconnect to their roots. In other words, he's telling them, wake up these branches, meaning these Chabad, these children of Chabad families, they should reconnect to their roots of Chabad from back in the day. That's what I assume. But two full Chabad shuls that I did not know existed in Montreal. So it seems like it was kind of active. Obviously, this is before the famous 9 shluchim came to Montreal, so there was no yeshiva established, which meant there's no real continuity until these 9 Hasidim came. Sorry?
There was yeshiva on Park Avenue.
Not a Chabad yeshiva. There was a small Talmud Torah, right? I think. I don't know. I shouldn't know. I don't know.
No, that was on St. Joseph.
That came later. That came in the 40s.
Yeah.
Right. This is 1920s. This is 20 years earlier.
There was a yeshiva on Park Avenue in between Fairmount and St. Vita.
Right. That was in the 40s. This is 1920s. 1929. This Menashe arrived in Montreal in 1905 after the Russian Revolution with the wife and kids. In 1910, based on what I found online, this Menashe lost his wife, who was 48. He lost his son a little while later, who was 17 years old. Lost one of his sons. That same year he incorporated Nisachari, 1910, and that same year he signed his citizenship papers, 1910. It's a busy year for him, 1910, apparently. Lost a wife, lost a child. I won't forget, yeah.
My grandfather was annoying because they both came from Russia, in the 1860s.
So he came in 1905. So there was one wave that came after the pogroms, which is in the late 1880s, I think. And then this is 1905 after the first Russian Revolution. Anyway, the bottom picture there is a picture of his grave, which is here at Back River. I had no idea I would have gone to visit if I knew. Anyway, there are grandchildren of Lavuts who live here in Montreal. My parents know who some of them are. And they're distant cousins. And just to close the story out with 2 notes before we get to our learning, the first note is that this Menashe Lavut's children, the Rebbe reached out to in the 1940s. So this Menashe Lavut passed away in 1931. So his children, who Rebbe didn't really know, as is evident by some of the letters, but at some point it seems like Rebbe didn't meet one of them. So it seems like one of them went to visit the Rebbe in New York. But anyway, Rebbe writes to the Kramer in 47, asking Rabbi Kramer to organize for a visa for my great-grandfather to come to Montreal to be a rabbi here, my father's grandfather. And the end was the previous Rebbe nixed the idea and said that he should go to Australia instead. But Divrei Tzadikim Kayamen, the words of the righteous are fulfilled, and if the Rebbe instructed that Isser Klugman come to Montreal, then it wasn't fulfilled with him, but it's fulfilled with his grandson, my father, and myself as well. So that's one little circle to the story. And then finally, connecting to our learning today, it's clear from a few letters that the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe reached out to this family Lavut, this Menashe Lavut's family's children, this Menashe Lavut's children, asking them for a copy of a manuscript of this book, Shaar HaKolel, that we're about to learn from, so that they can republish it. They must have had some manuscripts from their grandfather, this book. So those letters were like Rebbe writes to Rabbi Kramer, or Rebbe writes to Rabbi Greenglass actually, saying, please talk to the Lavuts, please encourage them to send us as fast as we can. And then a little while later, a letter saying, thank you very much, we got it. Both from the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe. So it seems like they worked together to get manuscripts for this book, Shaar HaKolel, from this Lavut family. So that's a little bit background on this Shaar HaKolel. Okay, so let's begin at least a little bit, and then we'll continue tomorrow because we'll finish everything. Good day. So the way we're going to do this is
Getting too complicated for your kids,
so how we're going to do this is we have 2 pages there. We have one single page, which is a copy of that book, Shaar HaKolel, his commentary on the Alkane, and then you have in the booklet here. I put pictures of on page 3 and 4 of the booklets there. I put snippet pictures of the sources that Rabbi Levi cites to, that the Shaar HaKolel cites to, so we understand what's going on. Okay, so let's see. Chapter 28. You see the Perek Chavches in the middle, on the right side of the single page. Kiddush Shachar, the daytime Kiddush. Okay, Kiddush Shachar Nikra Kidusha Rabba. The Kiddush of the morning is called the Great Kiddush. Right? Remember, we learned this is called the Great Kiddush, and we're trying to figure out why. Right? Where is it called the Great Kiddush? But Arvi Psachim, in the chapter Arvi Psachim, that's our Gemara. Daf Kuf Vav Amud Aleph, page 106a, which is the page we're learning, where there it says, Livrech Lon Mar Kiddush Rabba. This is the story when Rav Ashi visited Mechuzah, and they said, Master, would you please recite for us the Great Kiddush? Right? And that's when he said Bari Pri Hagafen, and he elongated his Bari Pri Hagafen because he wasn't sure what their custom was. And when he saw one older guy drink, he knew that their custom is just to say Hagafen, so he stopped, said Hagafen. And this is the source for the idea that the daytime Kiddush is called Kiddush Rabba, the Great Kiddush. Right? And we're trying to figure out why. So Rashi and Ashbam in their commentary explain why is it called Kiddush Rabba? Because every Kiddush begins with Hagafen. And therefore Hagafen is like the big Kiddush because it's the beginning and entry of all Kiddushim. Because every time you hold a cup of wine for anything, Hagafen comes the beginning. Certainly for Kiddush. So even though this is only Hagafen, we're calling it Kiddush Rabba because it begins with this big blessing of Hagafen that opens up every Kiddush. That's how Rashi said it. Right? We give another reason. We cited from, I think it was the Ran we quoted from. Here you're going to quote from somewhere else. But a cited from the Ran, which said that it's a kind of euphemistic language. It's really a smaller Kiddush. But we're calling it bigger Kiddush in this kind of euphemism. Calling it the grand Kiddush, even though really it's a smaller Kiddush. Right? Remember that? Yeah. Those are the 2 reasons we gave. But here he gives a different reason. Batam, the reason why it's called Kiddush Rabba, the Great Kiddush, Lefishi Rishona, the Birchas Hanenin. It's the first bracha you're going to make in thanking Hashem for food. It's the first right? You're going to be making hamotzi soon. Right? You're going to be making hamotzi soon. But first you're going to be making hagafen. So because the Kiddush is the first bracha to thank Hashem over the food, therefore it's called Kiddush Rabba, the Great Kiddush. And he gives an example. Kamoi Truma Gedola, just like the Great Truma. This is referring to the halach, the mitzvah of donating portions of your produce to the kohen, to the Levi, to the poor. Sometimes you got to take a portion to go to Yerushalayim. This is back in the biblical in the temple era, living in Jerusalem. The farmer would have to do that. Now, the first portion you give is to the priest, to the kohen. It's called Truma Gedola, the Grand Truma, even though it's much smaller than the subsequent gifts you're going to be giving. So he explains, the Truma is called the Truma Gedola, the Great Truma, because the first. Truma is Meiser Gedola Vena, even though the Meiser you're going to be giving later, and even the Truma Meiser, is bigger. Why is it called Gedola Great? Because it's the first one. Now he tells us to look in 3 sources in the parentheses. Sefer HaManig, Rabbeinu Bechaye, and the Mem Tes Mem there, that's Matas Moshe. So let's look at the booklets there on page 3, and you'll see, we'll look at the 3 sources. The first is Sefer HaManig. As you can see on the top of page 3, it says there, Rabbi Avram ben Nosson. This Sefer HaManig is written by a Rav named Avram ben Nosson.
It's me,
Avram ben Nosson.
a kohen.
I don't know if this was a kohen. He was known as Ravan or Reb Evan. Evan Aleph Vez, known standing for Avram ben Nosson. Hayarchi. His years were around the 1200, so it's a little bit before the Ran, which could be why he's quoting from him as an earlier source. So he writes the last 3 words on the line, first line. Why is he calling Beir Agafen the grand Kiddush? Because the first of all blessings. It could be means not just the first of all blessings that you're Kiddush by day, but in general, wine is the first of all blessings. Right? Wine is the only bracha which does not get covered by Hamoitzi. It's always like a first bracha is Hagafen. Even back in the old day, not just on Kiddush, but they would always have wine to open up their appetite. So wine is the first of all brachas. Maybe that's why. I don't think he means necessarily at the Kiddush meal, the Shabbos meal, but in general, wine is like the first and foremost of all blessings for enjoying food is wine.
Is it Shaar HaKolel this on the same level as Agafen?
No, shakel is much lower. Shakel, if you say Hagafen, you cover shakel. If you said Hamoitzi, you cover shakel. Hagafen is never covered by anything else.
So this one they always say on this one they also say Shaar HaKolel.
Which one?
Yeah, okay.
If you're not drinking wine.
Yeah.
If you're drinking beer, you would say shakel. But as we learned, one should use wine. Is the right way to do it. Sorry, what do you want to say?
Yes, because that wouldn't explain why then all the other Kiddush is going to be called great Kiddush as well, right?
That's a good question.
No, I mean I can understand
You're right.
the point, but it also I can understand the other point.
Yes, 100%. So you're making a good point, and perhaps it'll be clarified forward.
Right,
But that's a very good point, which I actually didn't think of, which is if we're calling it the grand Kiddush because of the bracha Hagafen, every Kiddush has Hagafen.
it's the first meal of that.
Right, so maybe it's called the grand Kiddush because this one's only Hagafen. It's defined by the great bracha, that's it.
Yeah.
No other bracha. Maybe. The grand bracha, again, only in the context of other food item brachas. In other words, is Hagafen greater than the bracha that you say Friday night thanking Hashem for Shabbos? No, it's only grand in the context of other food brachas, right? Where on Shabbos day, all you're doing is food brachas, and this is the grand bracha.
Yeah.
Maybe in that context, yeah. So it says, Rishon l'chol brachas anenin, it's the first of all brachas that one does over enjoying food. Like the grand truma, trumas meiser gedola. Trumas meiser, the second truma is greater. She achas me'eser, which is 1/10. The truma gedola, the first truma, which is called the grand truma, is trei mimea, is 2 out of 100, 60th.
Right. And you can't
right,
really
or someone who's even less wants to give his 1/50th, but because it's first, therefore it's called the grand truma. And likewise, he gives 2 other examples. He says, big day Esav, when Esav comes to Yaakov, Hashem the pasuk calls him B'no HaGadol, the great son. Great, they were born at the same time. Because he's born first, he's called the great. So we see great means first. So Kidusha Rabba, the great Kiddush, refers to really the first Kiddush, the first bracha, the Hagafen. Okay, reason number 1. Then, if you look back at, sorry, you want to say something?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, now if you look back at the text there, Rabba, of the Shaar HaKolel, in the parentheses, he says, he gives us the reason that the Truma, it's called Grand Kiddush because it's similar to the Truma Gdola, which is first.
Mm-hmm.
Then he says, Sefer HaManig, Ois Memches, gives us the source. Then he says, the ayin, see, Rabbeinu B'chaye in Parshas Ois HaBracha, and Matos Moshe Simin Toch Lamadalet. So he added the word ayin, see. When someone adds that in their Sefer, what that means is the sources that are about to follow aren't the source for what he said. But see there, because there's something interesting. Meaning, first he just gives a source without saying see. Just says, like the reason is because it's called the Grand Kiddush because it's first, Sefer HaManik. And see, Rabbeinu B'chaye and Matas Moshe. Meaning, if you look up the 2 sources, you'll see something else different. So what do we find there? And then we'll conclude with that and we'll continue tomorrow. Rabbeinu B'chaye, so look at the other page there on page 3 of the booklet. We're looking at Rabbeinu B'chaye and the Matas Moshe. So Rabbeinu B'chaye, as you can see, his years are 1050 to 1120. And yes, it's around the same time as the Sefer HaManik we had before. Yeah, Rambam was born a little bit earlier. 1105, 1104, somewhere there, yeah. Right, it's around that time. It's very possible. They're both Hispanic extract.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, so he says like this. He's commenting on Zois HaBracha, and he's commenting on the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu is referred to in the verse as Mechaykik. He's called the Mechaykik. Now, what exactly is the Machaykik? The commentators discuss what exactly Machaykik is. Rashi has one interpretation, different interpretations. So he goes with this idea that Machaykik is grandeur, great, Gedula. And he says that the reason why it's called Machaykik is because grandeur is associated with anything that's associated with the grand name of Hashem. The Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. Anything associated with that is called the grand. Okay? And therefore he says in the second, so he says that the last word on the first line. And this is the truth. Torah was given with the grand name of God, the Yud, Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. It's a bit Kabbalistic, this thinking. Not the simple interpretation as Rashi has a different interpretation. And he goes on to say, from here you can be alerted to the fact that Bekisvei HaKodesh, in our holy literature, anything that's referred to as grand or great or big, gadol, like the Beis HaMikdash, gadol, which is called gadol, great. As the verse reads, that it's called Beis Gadol Saraf Be'esh. The whole big house was burnt in fire, referring to the temple as the big grand house. Likewise, the high priest is called the Kohen Gadol, the great or the big, the grand Kohen. Likewise, the river that comes out of Israel, there's the 4 rivers cited in the verse, and one of the rivers goes through Eretz Yisrael, and that river is called Hanor HaGadol Nahar Paras. The big river is the Euphrates River, I think it's called, the Pras. And that river actually is not the bigger one of the 4, but it's called grand because it's associated with Eretz Yisrael. So grand because of its greatness and association with the name of Hashem. Right? Lashon Rabba. And the same thing is true of the wisdom of truth, the scholars of truth, referring to the Kabbalistic scholars, who refer to things as Rabba. Rabba, Shu Targum Shal Gadol. Rabba is the translation of grand, of great. Namely, in the Kaddish, just like by Kaddish, Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavarach. Amen, we say Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba. Let his grand name be blessed. The name of Hashem, the Yud Hey and the Vav and the Hey, being associated with Gadol, or in the Aramaic translation, Rabba, grand or great. V'chein Yehei Shlama Rabba. Likewise, let there be grand peace. Again, grand. V'chein Kiddush Hayoim, and so too the daytime Kiddush is called Kidusha Rabba, the grand Kiddush. V'loi Kein Shalayla. This is not true of the nighttime Kiddush. Why is the nighttime Kiddush different than the daytime Kiddush to be called Rabba in terms of what Rabbi Levi is saying? Somehow the daytime Kiddush is associated with the name of Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the nighttime Kiddush is not somehow. Didn't explain. The Shaar HaKolel will explain for us. Okay. Good morning. Likewise, Shal Avas Olam Aftanu. Likewise, the daytime bracha we say just before Shema, Avas Olam Aftanu. You loved us, we say to God, eternal love, and so on. Shekardin Avarabba. This is called the grand love, associated with again Yud Kei Vav Kei. V'lo Kein Shal Avos. This is not sure the nighttime bracha of Avas Olam Aftanu. Right? We say Avas Olam, the last bracha before Shema through the day, and the last bracha of before Shema at nighttime, in Arvis versus Shachris. The daytime one is called Avarabba, the great love, associated with Yud Kei Vav Kei, as opposed to the night. It would seem, at least from what he's saying now, that it has to do with day rather than night. Maybe because day is associated with Yud Kei Vav Kei, whereas night is not associated with Yud Kei Vav Kei. Night is associated with the name either Aleph Dalet Nun Yud or Aleph Lamed Hey Yud Mem Alakim. So it could be it's a question of day and night here, but we'll see in the Shaar HaKolel is going to give a different reading or similar reading. Okay. The same thing is true of the 7th day of Sukkot. We call it Taishayin Rabba, the great salvation, Rabba. Why is it called? Because it's 26 days after the day of creation. The first day of creation is the 25th of Elul. Rosh Hashanah is the 6th day of creation on which man was created. 6 days earlier is the 25th of Elul. The 25th of Elul is the first day of creation. 26 days after the 25th of Elul is Hoshana Rabbah. And 26, of course, is the numerical value of God's name, Yud, Hey, and the Vav and the Hey. So therefore, the grand salvation, 26 days of creation, after creation, is associated with the name of Hashem, and therefore it's called Rabba the Great. Kol Eila, all these things, in Taskel Bahem, if you think about this whole list I just gave you, the Ma'ariv at night, sorry, the bracha of Olam during the day, the Kiddush during the day versus the night, the Yehesh Mei Rabba, the Hoshana Rabba, the Kohen Gadol, the Euphrates River, all these different things. This whole list. If you look at them, you'll think about them. They all come down to one point. The heavens and understand this very well, and that's why they're called great, because they're all associated with the name of Hashem, the Yud, the Hey, and the Vav, and the Hey. Okay. He doesn't really explain much more than just the association with Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Didn't explain how all these things are connected specifically with Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, except for Hashanah Rabbah. He said it's connected because of 26 days since creation. But Rabbi Levi in his Shaar HaKolel will give us a little bit more. Perhaps we'll get to that tomorrow. Okay, now one more. So let's do the last comment on the bottom of page 3. This is Matan Moshe. So he told us to look in the Manig. The Manig was a source for this idea that it's called the Grand Kiddush because it's the first of the brachas, like Truma Gedola. Then he said, look at Rabbi Levi and look at Matan Moshe. So Rabbi Levi gives a different reason why it's called the Grand Kiddush, because it's associated with Yud Hey Vav Hey, the name of Hashem, the grand name of Hashem. So which means and then he's telling us now to look at Matan Moshe. So here he says, again, you can see here his Matan Moshe passed away in 1606. He was in Krakow. Moshe ben Avram, I think his name was. The last picture there, yeah. Third last word. Because the day Kiddush is only rabbinic, they decided not to be too elaborate because they didn't want to compare it to the night Kiddush, because the night Kiddush is biblical, at least has very strong biblical legs, as we learned in the Gemoro. Yeah, but the day Kiddush is rabbinic, and therefore no elaboration, just hagafen. Now, the Karu Kidusha Rabba, they called it the Grand Kiddush, Lekinui, as a kind of nickname. Lefisha Ene Kiddush Laila. It's not the same thing as a night Kiddush. Vizutta Shiure, and it's actually of a lower stature. Kedekara Lusuma Sagi Nar. There's an expression in the Gemara. The way we call a blind person in the Gemara is someone who has lots of light. It's a euphemism. Instead of saying he can't see, you say he has lots of light, which, by the way, actually scientifically is correct. Blind people are blind because they have too much exposure to light. But anyway, it's actually used as a euphemism. Now, this expression, Sagi Nar, too much light, is the Gemara's way of saying euphemism. When you want to say something as euphemism, you'd say, I'm saying it to you in the Sagi Nahar way. Right? So he's using the Sagi Nahar language to call the day Kiddush grand, because really it's actually smaller.
This is a different
reason. And then he says, Rashi Rashbam, Pirshu Benyan Acher. Rashi and Rashbam give a different reason. So we have so far, how many reasons? Rashi and Rashbam say, why is it called the Grand Kiddush? Because it's the Bracha HaGafen, which all Kiddush opens with. Rashi Rashbam. Sefer HaManig, which was quoted inside the Shaar HaKolel, is because it's the first of your brachas when you enjoy food, like Truma Gedola, even though it's smaller, it's the first, therefore it's Gedola. Rabbi Levi said it's associated with the name of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. We don't have any much explanation yet, but it's associated somehow with Yud Kei Vav Kei, rather than the night Kiddush, which is not associated with Yud Kei Vav Kei. We'll learn about that tomorrow from the Shaar HaKolel, and that's going to become connected to why we say Al Kain. Number 3. Number 4 is it's being said in euphemism. It's the smaller one. We don't want to say the smaller one, so we call you the bigger one. So this is how, these are the different reasons for why it's called the Great Kiddush. Now he's saying all of this to set ourselves up for why it is we say those introductory paragraphs before the Hagafen, because why we say those paragraphs are going to be linked to why it's called the Grand Kiddush, specifically this explanation of Rabbeinu B'chaye. This explanation of Rabbeinu B'chaye, that it's called the Grand Kiddush because it's associated with the name of Hashem, is linked to why we say the paragraphs before the Hagafen. Those paragraphs indicate our association with the Yud Kei Vav Kei, as we'll explain. And it's going to answer our question about someone who says Al Kain, but doesn't say the paragraph before. Is that okay? Is it okay just to start with the word Al Kain? That's also going to become clarified, God willing, tomorrow as we take what we just learned into the next segment. Because all we did with now was why is it called Grand Kiddush? And then we're going to get to how that helps us understand why we say those paragraphs and what one does, or what's the halacha about just saying Al Kain. That, God willing, coming tomorrow. Okay. So we I should have. We're going to try to start a little bit earlier.
Started at 8?
Yeah, not at 8, like 8:15ish.
Okay.
And I want to.
The rest of the week also, or?
We're going to start. I think going forward, we're going to start doing that. I only started doing 8:30 because I just I was doing drop off.
Yeah.
You're doing drop off, right?
Lucky you got off drop off.
So now I'm not doing drop off anymore, but also because there's some people who come earlier that are going to work. So we're gonna try to start 8:15.
Yeah, try to-
Before 8:15, you want to get started, and that way, if you want to be at work at 9 o'clock, and do so. Okay.
Yeah.
A wonderful day, Yidden. So Alan, you inspired all this. Shkoyach, and you put me down a rabbit hole yesterday, going through all the history of early Montreal Chabad, the early Montreal Chabad footprint. And it's a great uncle of mine. How did I had no idea. It's pretty. For me, it was very exciting to learn.
I have to look up the synagogue we went to. I think it was Musafari.
So that would have been.
I have a sitter from there.
Oh yeah.
My father's sitter. So
In New York, actually.
I'm gonna bring it.
Nesachari. So it would have been one of these two shows that the previous make reference to in 1929.
On Clark Street in between St. Joseph and Laurier.
Do you know which town your family came from in Russia?
Well, maybe.
What was their last name?
Nachfolger.
You give me the spelling. I'm gonna look it up and try to find. Yeah, send me like whatever names you have. Send it to me, and I'm gonna do some little digging on some of these sites that I was using yesterday. There's a lot of like resources online. Sorry, I love this stuff. I'm a pseudo historian, not an actual historian, but I enjoy this kind of thing. And then because you come to my class, you get stuck with the results of my little fun research. Yeah.
So you're gonna have to go to my class. I'm studying a lot of UFOs.
Anyway, I'm waiting for the newspaper clippings that they're going to send me from this thing, and hopefully get some more insight into who this Menashe Lavut was.
I have a question now.
Yeah.
On Purim, you know how we call, I don't know if it's an MTC creation, but you know when they call it the Grand Kiddush.
When? Where?
They call it Grand Kiddush at the Purim meal, or we have them to sit down
Banquet.
for a banquet.
Yeah, Mishnah. For some reason, no. See, for some reason, in common Ashkenazic parlance, Hakafis. Oh yeah. Well, why we call it the Grand Kiddush? That's just called the Grand Kiddush because it's really grand, just literally because there's a lot of food and a lot of people. But actually, it's funny enough. I'm sure there's linguists who would look into this and understand it better. But apparently, there's like this phenomenon of like amongst the Ashkenazi Jews especially, that anytime they do like a religious meal, they call it Kiddush. Like people will say, I have a bris and I'm doing a Kiddush after. The bris is a Monday morning, there's no Kiddush, but they'll call it a Kiddush afterwards. It just became like a word to describe a public meal for a religious sort of event. Yeah, we're doing a bar mitzvah in the morning and then we're having a Kiddush afterwards. It's Tuesday morning to get the bar mitzvah, or Monday, but they'll call it a Kiddush after. I don't know why that is and how that happened, but colloquially.
There's no
Kiddush means sanctification. Okay, so right, Kiddush means sanctification, right? A sanctification ceremony, right? Kiddush, like Kadesh, to sanctify. Which, I mean, you can call the brachas that you're making over the bris Kiddush. I guess you can call it that. But Kiddush is like in like halachic literature, Kiddush is reserved for.
It's a loose term.
It's a loose term, but in halachic literature, Kiddush is reserved for the cup you're holding when you sanctify the Shabbos or Yom Tov, right? Or the bracha you make in davening to sanctify Yom Tov.
But this is for Sefarad also. Like they'll say there's a Kiddush after.
Oh yeah.
After lunch. Yeah.
Even though it's not Shabbos.
No.
It's a Monday morning. They'll say the Kiddush after the bris. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it just became colloquial associated with making a religious ceremonious meal.
Right.
So anyway, a wonderful day, Yidden. And tomorrow we will, God willing, finish Rabbi Levi's commentary on the Alkane and that whole paragraph there. Good day, Yidden.
Thank you.